You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Happy Women's History Month. It makes me a little cranky that we get 1 month, and there's 1 month for Black History, and what are the other 10 months? Pale Male Months? Anyway, happy Women's History Month, and happy Post-Super Tuesday. We've got a great show for you today. We start with my first guest, who's an expert on what cultural elites in the Arab Gulf region have to say about women's political and cultural rights and how their religion is or is not related to their politics. Then we move on to an astounding story by a North Korean woman who has suffered human trafficking, imprisonment, and forced labor before she made a dramatic escape from the Hermit Kingdom. And last, we hear from a sports columnist about what it's really like inside men's locker rooms, and also what to expect from the upcoming Olympics from women athletes. Also, later in the program, we debut a new feature department called We Were Right, or We Won This, because I don't think we take credit enough for what we've accomplished. But first, we need to go inside the headlines. I just bet you assumed I was going to do the elections inside the headlines. And actually, I will get to them, but later in Fighting Words. I want to cover a story that did not get much attention and should, because it's as great or greater a threat to us all than even Donald Trump. The first global assessment of the threats to creatures that pollinate the world's plants was released by a group affiliated with the UN on just a few days ago in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The summary will be posted online. Pollinators, including some 20,000 species of wild bees, contribute to the growth of fruit and vegetables and many nuts as well as flowering plants. Plants that depend on pollination make up 35% of global crop production volume, with a value of as much as $577 billion a year. The agricultural system for which pollinators play a key role creates millions of jobs worldwide. But now many pollinator species are threatened with extinction, including some 16% of vertebrates like birds and bats, according to the document, hummingbirds, and some 2,000 avian species that feed on nectar spread pollen as they move from flower to flower. I know this as a gardener. Extinction risk for insects is not as well defined, the report notes, but it warned that high levels of threat existed for some bees and butterflies, with at least 9% of bee and butterfly species at risk. That's what happens when I see a dead butterfly or a dead bee in the garden. This is due, they theorize, to aggressive agricultural practices that grow crops on every available acre, that eliminate patches of wildflowers and cover crops that provide food for pollinators. Farming also exposes the creatures, the pollinators, to pesticides, and bees are under attack from parasites and from pathogens as well. And there's climate change, especially in the case of bumblebees in North America and Europe, because a warming world changes the territories of plants and pollinators, as well as the plant's time of flowering. Creates a troublesome question. Will the pollinators be there when the flowers need to be pollinated? So the group issuing the report, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, is made up of 124 countries, including the U.S., and it was formed through the UN in 2012. And the group did not conduct new research for this, but it synthesized all the current studies and analyses to reach its current conclusions. It's not structured, this report, to support advocacy, but to give governments and policymakers and organizations a sense of the current state of science and the options to address problems. The authors said, this is an urgent problem, and we can do this if we address it. Later on in the program, in our new feature, We Won This, I'm going to show an example of a related environmental issue that has been turned around. This one, the decline of pollinators that poses a threat to the world food supply, needs addressing urgently as well. And now it's time for my first guest. Dr. Alessandra L. Gonzalez is a lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago, and she's the non-resident research fellow at the Liechtenstein Institute on Self-Determination at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton. She is the principal investigator of the Islamic Social Attitudes Survey Project, a study in connection with Baylor on Islamic religiosity and social attitudes, including women's rights attitudes in the Arab Gulf region, and her latest book is Islamic Feminism in Kuwait. Dr. Alessandra L. Gonzalez. Alessandra, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robin.
How did someone named Alessandra L. Gonzalez become an academic expert on Islamic feminism?
I was a freshman when 9/11 happened and became very interested in any way that scholarship and social studies could help build a bridge between those of us growing up in the United States and others abroad. And so when I had the chance in graduate school, through a personal connection, to travel to Kuwait, this was in 2006, I did a little bit of research and realized that women got the right to vote just the year before, in 2005.
Correct. That's right.
And so I took the opportunity before traveling to find out as much as I could. And then once I got there, connected with professors at the university and said, "Look, I'm a new graduate student, and I'm very interested in finding out how women in Kuwait navigate their rights within their culture and within Islam." And I found really open arms with the professors and Kuwaitis there, and was able to do field work throughout my graduate studies, and became the inspiration for the rest of my work.
Interesting. Well, I mean, on the one hand, it's always completely a wonderful thing when there's cross-cultural investigation and scholarship and sharing. On the other hand, I'm wondering, do you ever get blowback from Muslim feminists because in certain periods, identity politics are so strong that there's a feeling that Western women or women from the global North have, quote unquote, interpreted us, unquote, in their voice. And how dare you, when we have our own scholars like the wonderful late Fatima Mernessi and Nawal Sadawi and Mona El Tahawi and so forth. So have you ever got blowback, or how do you deal with that?
Yes, that's a very good point. I think you're right that we all have to acknowledge our positionality when approaching studies. I only had actually once at a conference some Western converts to Islam asked me this question. They asked if my not being a Muslim would bias my results. And the answer I gave, which I really believe is true, is that because I take an open position, I come with no real investment in an Islamic agenda, towards feminism or towards any other issue. I really try to remain neutral. And so, as much as I can, I try to ask people what they mean when they want to proclaim their own positions towards the feminism within Islam. And I think, as you'll see in the book, I tried to really take in some ways at face value that people believed what they were saying when they either took a conservative position against women's right to vote, or when they spoke about a feminism that sounded like a Western feminism, but within patriarchal constraints.
Well, not that feminism anywhere isn't already within patriarchal constraints, what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I agree with you, Robin, because that's something I wanted to come out in the book is, we all are trying to find power within our own cultural constraints. And as you've noted in your work and on your program, patriarchal interests and constraints are not limited to the Middle East or to Muslim countries.
Hardly.
So if we highlight what women are achieving despite all those constraints, what could we learn here in the United States, and how could we partner together?
Right, right. The book is called Islamic Feminism in Kuwait: The Politics and Paradoxes, and it explores what the cultural elites in the Arab Gulf region have to say about women's political and cultural rights. And how their faith isn't or is related to their politics. And you did over 1,000 Kuwaiti college student interviews, didn't you, in 2008?
I conducted a survey of college students and interviews with the elites that you mentioned.
Yeah, I don't know if you found this at all, but the irony to me as I began work now 30, 40 years ago almost, in the international women's movement, is I found sometimes that much of the time, I must say, verily most of the time, that the cultural elites were more conservative and more just unwilling to rock the boat because of either privilege or greater constraints on the women than village women, who would say right out these extraordinary feminist things, whether they were educated or not, mostly not, whether they were literate or not, mostly not. Did you find any of that, or did you do any interviews outside of your focus was the cultural elite?
Yes, well, I think you're right on the mark, actually, from what I saw. In the book, I outline each chapter as a paradox to unravel, and one is that what I viewed as what we might look for in Western feminism had not taken root in Muslim hearts and minds. So by the time women had the right to vote, there was kind of this view, that we're going to vote for maybe those that we feel close to, and often those were the Islamists who were against their right to vote. So I wanted to unravel this paradox a bit.
Right.
And just to your point, this second wave feminism that did appear among some elites in Kuwait and Egypt and throughout the Arab world, they were really only able to be exercised by a very few, as you mentioned, wealthy women. And I think what's happening now, you see younger women going to university who are children of parents who did move for more opportunity into the city. So you saw this demographic change since the 60s. So parents, families from rural backgrounds that didn't have the opportunity or didn't facilitate opportunities for more education did make this transition. So what you see now are children of families who made this effort to move from rural, maybe Bedouin backgrounds, and now they're in universities, graduating with degrees, and getting jobs in the city. So you might see from the outside what looks like an Islamist resurgence, and in some ways their voting behavior reflects that. But it's deeper than that. It's democratizing the opportunity for education and for women to explore what they want from different levels of society.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting. I'm curious as to, in this country, you ask the average person, even a young woman, even a millennial, what do you know about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton? And you just might get a blank stare. You might not, but but you might. I'm curious whether you found in Kuwait any consciousness about the work of Noura al-Falah, who was the Kuwaiti woman who basically was their Susan B. Anthony, their Simone de Beauvoir, or the reverse. Simone de Beauvoir was the French Noura al-Falah. She organized and led marches of 10,000 women in Kuwait City for suffrage in the 80s. Do people reference her at all? Did her name come up at all, or has it pretty much been disappeared?
Well, I would say there is still a recognition of the first wave, relatively first wave of feminists in Kuwait, and there are many that still bring that memory because they're still alive.
Right.
And I think that you'll see them initiating women's rights conferences, and they're there. Mm-hmm. But there's a real acknowledgement, I think, that they need to connect with these younger women sometimes who don't share their more liberal, kind of appearance or methods or background. That was a challenge, I think, for women coming together from both the Islamists and the secular first wave for a while, but they came together for this right to vote, and I think more and more have realized they need to come together for more women to take their place in Parliament and make some real change in legislation.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I know that some of them, sort of plunged into despair as in seeing the younger women vote for Islamists, thinking this is not what we meant at all. But
Exactly.
there still has to be dialogue. Intergenerational dialogue is as complicated as sometimes cross-cultural dialogue is. It is a form of cross-cultural dialogue. In fact, Alessandra, you do interesting and important work. Thank you for it. The book is called Islamic Feminism in Kuwait: The Politics and Paradoxes. And thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
And thank you, Robin.
We have to take a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. This is Robin Morgan, but we'll be right back with an incredible story, like a Perils of Pauline saga of a woman who escaped from the Hermit Kingdom, North Korea, and lived to tell the tale.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest is an award-winning investigative reporter, Susan McClelland, who has co-authored a book with Lucia Jang. It's the memoir of Jang, a rural North Korean woman who endured trafficking, sexual slavery, imprisonment, torture, and finally escaped the Hermit Kingdom and lived long enough to tell. Here is Susan McClelland. Susan McClelland, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Well, congratulations on this book, which you have co-authored with Lucia Jang. It's quite extraordinary. It's the first memoir by a rural North Korean woman. She didn't grow up in privilege, and we get through her a look at the fanatic devotion and then fear and disillusionment of the regime in North Korea that we've never had that look before, particularly in terms of a woman's life. And then this incredible journey of forced marriage to a man who had raped her, and then her family finally giving in to her desperate desire to divorce, and then the family trying to sell her baby to not have the cost of feeding him because of the famine. I mean, and then she finally illegally crossed the river and to China to get out of North Korea and was caught twice and was sent to prison and was pregnant. I mean, my God, it's such a saga till she finally got free. How did you come to co-write this with her? She would be with us this morning, except that there's a language problem, which on radio is particularly exacerbated. So you're the voice for both of you. How did you get it? How did you get involved, Susan?
Well, the original publisher in Canada had put out a query among the North Korean dissident community and looking for a memoir. They weren't particular about it being male or female. And it took a long time, but eventually the community came back with Lucia's story. And then the publisher called me and asked me if I would go meet the woman and just see if there was a story there to be told. And as you've just described, there was a story there to be told. And whenever I worked with Lucia, for over a year, we would meet almost every weekend with a translator in between us. She would tell me her story, and she's very animated. She's very much like an actress and a storyteller, especially as we got moving with this. And after every scene, she would say to me, "Do you think anyone will like my story? Do you think I have a story?"
Oh, my God. It's so dramatic. It reads like a novel. It's an interesting combination because it's not an as told to. It's not a strict translation. I mean, you brought your skills as an award-winning journalist to this book, and it, as I say, it reads like a novel. You can't put it down. but it is in fact factual. And we've never had a glimpse into this kind of world before, have we?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly of her age, being a woman going through the famine the way she has, there have been some other defector stories on the market more recently, but they tend to be by younger, the subjects are much younger. So we've got a very adult voice here and a woman's voice. And as you said, a woman from a rural area, not from Pyongyang.
Yes.
So it really shows, and the trafficking element, that is absolutely unique. I've spoken at some conferences involving experts, worldwide trafficking experts, and they have not heard about this phenomenon of the North Korean women being trafficked into these marriages with Chinese men.
Yes.
And that gives us a glimpse both of a woman who did this for her family, but also a social issue that very few, I mean, the UN now knows about it through their UN Commission of Inquiry, but very few people know about the phenomenon of these women and the human trafficking.
Right. Well, we've known about it from other countries. We've known about it from Thailand. We've known about it because of the bare branches problem in China due to the one-child policy and not educating that girls were valuable as well. And so China has, approximately 10 million vanished girl children, and their sex ratios in birth are wildly skewed. So what do you do with all these young men who want, quote, brides, and sometimes they do mean brides and sometimes they don't, and women across the border from poor countries are smuggled in. And but we, of course, do not know about the North Korean connection because so little is known about North Korea in any event. And she was imprisoned a number of times. She was pregnant while in prison. The government demanded she get an abortion, but she convinced the jailers to delay it, and then she managed to give birth out of prison, and then she fled to Mongolia under gunfire. I mean, it's an amazing story. It should be a movie.
But most North Korean defectors have stories like this, and I think that's why, Lucia is speaking for so many people, including the women still trapped inside China trying to get out.
Yeah. The link between her sense of being and her mother, her ancestors, her father, the problems with her family. They're now in Toronto. They've settled in Canada, yes? Yes.
And that's one of the things that drew me to working with Lucia and really struck me about her story and why I feel it's so important, is so many other accounts from North Korea, both as books and newspaper articles, just in the media in general, it's changed a bit more recently, but has, when we were working on this book in 2012 and 13, very much depicted the people were so brainwashed, they were turning on their families. And that, of course, did happen.
Yeah.
That's unquestionable. But at the same time, there really is this deep sense of family and some of the traditions that sort of seeped in, especially in the rural areas. There was this sort of conflict between, as we've written in the book, she went to a fortune teller. She was going to the graves of ancestors. I mean, there was this sense of something more shamanic. The mom putting salt around the house to ward off spirits.
Right,
I mean,
right.
All this was sort of moving underneath. So,
well, those are ancient traditions, and deeply embedded that not even the most authoritarian government, I guess, can uproot.
Exactly, and they couldn't uproot the love of family too.
Susan, what insight did this give you into North Korea that the West, in quotes, should know of a way of dealing with it? It seems sometimes from outside so much the hermit kingdom, and the ruling family, now personified by this round-faced, movie-loving, basketball-obsessed killer. I mean, who kills relatives, who kills anybody who gets in his way. I mean, it seems almost impenetrable. Of course, it's not. Nothing is. But how would you best imagine piercing that isolation and the role of women in that?
Well, I think there's two aspects. The first is looking at China. There are, we don't even have statistics, but North Koreans they have to flee through China if they're going to escape North Korea. The border between North and South Korea is so heavily mined, there's no way they can escape that way.
Mm-hmm.
But China does not see North Koreans as refugees, but as illegal work migrants. And certainly in certain times, they were hunting North Koreans down.
Mm.
If they find a North Korean citizen, they will deport them back. And then they're imprisoned in North Korea, and
right.
You can imagine what happens.
Yes.
So I think the first thing is really find, and there's stateless children in China. Children born from North Korean women in these marriages, they're not recognized by the state. So you've got abandoned and stateless children living there.
Oh, God.
So I think the first thing is really beginning to put some pressure on China with the human rights abuses of North Korean women in China, and where are these stateless children?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first part. And the role of women could be the women's groups really bonding together behind this issue,
right.
Because we don't even have the numbers, but anecdotally they know that when the defectors end up in Thailand and Laos, which do recognize North Koreans as refugees and will send them to South Korea, where they are granted citizenship, anecdotally, frontline workers will say that the bulk of defectors that they see streaming in through China, if they haven't been paid for by relatives and gone through an underground route directly North Korea, China, are women.
Right.
And they're women that have children. And they're women with children that they may have had to have left behind in China just to continue their escape.
Right, right.
And in North Korea, I think there is a younger population in North Korea that is more savvy. There is technology now going in and out, particularly around that border area. There is more back and forth. And these young people have had to create their own businesses of selling and barter. So there's sort of this burgeoning, quiet sort of barter-selling economy brewing.
Right.
And that is, I think, something that a lot of the North Korean experts on reunification are looking at and saying, how can we utilize these young people?
Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Well, thank you for your insights, but even more, thank you for this extraordinary book, which is like nothing I've ever read before. I mean, it's called Stars Between the Sun and Moon. Its subtitle is One Woman's Life in North Korea and Escape to Freedom. Please extend to Lucia our welcome to the West and our awe at her intransigent, wonderful endurance and stubbornness, and our thanks to you for bringing this to us in English.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's been a pleasure.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. We have to return to Ding Dong, the Judge is Dead, that is, Antonin Scalia, for just a moment today for an outrage that has come to surface. Among the court's members, he was not only the longest tenured justice, but he was the most frequent traveler on what I'm calling SCOTUS junkets, trips paid for by private sponsors, some of whom had cases before the court. When he died, he was staying again for free at the West Texas hunting lodge owned by a businessman named Poindexter, whose company had recently had a matter before the Supreme Court. And that was in addition to the 258 subsidized trips that he took from 2004 to 2014. Scalia went on at least 23 privately funded trips in 2014 alone to places like Ireland and Hawaii and Switzerland. He gave speeches, he participated in moot court events, he taught classes, and a few weeks before his death he was in Singapore and Hong Kong. This is appalling, and it should be re-examined. Ethical standards prohibit judges from accepting gifts from anyone with a matter currently before the court, but apparently free trips to Scalia don't count in that category. Outrageous. Also outrageous. Did you know that there had been a 1,000 women unit during World War II that transported military planes and bombers and trained men to fly them? They were called the WASPs, shorthand for Women Air Force Service pilots. In fact, I remember my mother and my aunt talking about these brave women. But apparently they were technically not part of the military. Therefore, the Army is denying the eldest among them, still alive or recently deceased, denying burial or urn for ashes at Arlington National Cemetery, saying that they're running out of space anyway, and these women were not really part of the military. Representative Martha McSally, a Republican of Arizona, refreshing to be able to say something nice about a Republican for a change, was quoted as saying, "Think of the irony that at the same time the Pentagon is opening all missions to men and women in the military, they're closing the door to the women who were pioneers." Indeed, McSally was the Air Force's first female fighter pilot to fly in combat, and she's introduced legislation that would allow the WASPs to be buried at Arlington. She said only about 100 women from the unit were still alive, and just 2 had requested to be laid at rest in the cemetery. "If you're not going to do the right thing," Ms. McNally said, "we're going to make it happen." So write, if you are so moved, to your legislators and say, these women have a right to be buried in Arlington. I mean, good grief. If you were married to a veteran already laid to Arlington, your request is approved, even if you never served in a military unit. And several foreigners are buried there, including a German prisoner of war from World War II who died in American custody. So what's the problem with the WASPs? It's a surreal outrage. Time for another quick break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and when I come back, I'll be talking with a feminist, unashamedly feminist sportscaster about what happens to men in sports and also what to expect from the next Olympics.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And here we are again, this time with Kavitha Davidson, who is the sports columnist at Bloomberg View, where she covers the intersection of sport and society, culture, politics, race, gender, and business. Very smart intersections. Kavitha, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure to have you here. Every time we have somebody smart about sports on the program, which isn't as often as I would like, I take advantage of their expertise, particularly since feminist sportscasters are more than there used to be. You used to have to be on LSD with a microscope to find them, but but now there's a few. And you're in a you must not have had that easy a path, because you're a good writer, you're a political writer, you're a woman of color, and and you're a sports columnist. Oh my God, are you all in one piece and vertical?
I am in one piece. I'll say that my path to this job has been easier than most, thankfully, but the stuff that you deal with on a day-to-day basis from, readers and commenters leaves much to be desired.
Yeah. Somebody who had written about sports some time ago said to me that she had been of course, naturally assaulted online, and, you get out of the field and so forth, and on Twitter. And some guy had said to her, I like sports to get away from women. I don't want women interpreting sports.
Right. Yeah. No, there's still this whole mentality that wants to maintain sports as a separate sphere just for men. And not only is that ridiculous on a social and moral level, but it's just ridiculous also just plainly on a business level.
Yeah. And dumb and stupid as well. Just right. God. Well, you've written so wonderfully about this. You did both for Bloomberg, where you are now, and for HuffPo. I remember a time when the first, shibboleth raised against women sportscasters were, we can't have women in the locker rooms afterwards, the locker rooms. And of course, we finally outgrew that. Women pushed their way in. But you extended the discussion to what about the privacy of the players? Why are reporters in the locker room anyway? This wonderful piece that you wrote a while ago for Bloomberg, it just made such sense. And the players seem to be grateful for having a little privacy as well,
Right. I think we've gotten to the point now where, yes, there are a lot of female reporters who still say that they get certain treatment from players when they're in the locker room that their male counterparts don't get. But the conversation has now extended to, as you said, broadly, why are reporters in the locker room? Players are just uncomfortable, whether you're a man or a woman, with people who aren't part of your team being there when they're changing clothes. I think that's a completely legitimate stance to have. There are certain struggles when it comes to, when reporters have their job to do, if they need an immediate reaction post-game, or if they're,
right,
especially local reporters, more than national reporters, or I'm a columnist, so, somebody like me doesn't need an immediate reaction to something. We could wait 10 or 15 minutes until these players are fully dressed. But given that, it's really, it seems to be a vestige of another time that we still have this kind of outdated practice where we kind of shove a microphone in a half-naked player's face and say, what do you think about that goal that you scored?
Right. And I wonder if it doesn't have to do with the leftover tone of treating athletes as if they were gladiators. That same sort of indifference to, you're getting a concussion and you're shortening your life and you're up for neurological diseases because the helmets aren't good. In other words, I have my own beefs with many of the players and the mentality of the players and the way that the suits in the big boxes let the players get away with violence against women, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the players also are exploited.
Absolutely. I think that you're spot on. This particular article that I wrote, the peg was an NFL Network broadcast that inadvertently showed in the background, while they were interviewing a player by his locker room, several players walking by to the showers and half dressed, some fully naked. The NFL specifically, but really throughout all of our sports, you can definitely see how players are exploited in a certain way. And I think that it's really hard for a lot of fans to kind of grasp that idea because, they kind of look at them and they say, you're making millions of dollars to basically play a game. Don't you have a great life? But, it still kind of comes down to a very basic labor versus management kind of argument where you kind of have to say, yes, these players make a decent amount of money, although I do need to point out that we always think of the guys who make $20 million a year. We never think of the guys who make $500,000 or $400,000, whatever the league, minimum wage is, and that also is a lot of money. Yes, but
and that's most of them. That is most of them,
exactly, especially in a sport like football, where, you have, 50 guys on a field at any time and 4 of them probably making the millions, and that's pretty much it. But you also have to think about, why do they make that kind of money? It's because they're making multiple times that for the people who are paying them.
Right.
And nobody ever gets resentful at the billionaire owners who are basically making, a fortune off of these laborers. They're really laborers. That's
right.
Really how we need to look at it.
That's right. And the treatment of the players is then mirrored in the way that they quote unquote, and I say this with a heavy sense of irony, quote, protect the players if a player gets in trouble, usually for, in some way or another, violence against women. Let's move on to that. One of your other wonderful pieces was called "Why Doesn't the Debate on Hitting Women Include Women?"
It is getting better. I think that you are seeing a little bit more female voices in the national media, especially talking about violence against women and violence against women in sports. The problem is industry-wide. It's not limited to sports. Newsrooms are decidedly male.
Right.
Sports newsrooms are especially male.
Right.
And that's really the problem. The people who are doing the hiring, I think I saw a statistic that 91% of sports editors are men, and most of them are white men as well.
Right.
So there is an issue here where we don't have some will say we don't have the voices to put out there, but even when they do have the voices to put out there, they're not promoted to the level where they would be put out there, or they're just not featured. How many times do you see, and again, not even relegated to the sports world, how many times do you see a discussion on national news media that features a panel of all men talking about women's issues, talking about abortion rights?
Yeah, of course, it's industry wide. I mean, it's patriarchy. It's throughout the entire society. But in sports, it's so dispiriting because this is supposedly a celebration of, meritocracy, of athleticism, of healthy, young, terrific bodies doing wonderful things. I mean, and we know the prejudice against women athletes. I mean, recently Billie Jean, who was an old friend, came on the program, and we were reminiscing. I mean, it's been so long since she made the fight, even for just not even equal, but even just comparable pay.
Right.
And that's still going on in many areas, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. And, the thing about the coverage is, and it kind of speaks to I think the underlying problem whenever we talk about an issue that's related to women in sports and the treatment, whether it's fans or athletes or members of the media, it comes down to there's still this very old school mentality that thinks that sports is catered for men, but there isn't a demand, shall we say, among women for sports, and that's just,
that's just not
untrue.
That's totally untrue. And since Title IX, quote, legitimized that interest.
Right.
We've seen, they used to say also little girls weren't interested in sports. Little girls didn't care about sports. And the minute you get access, guess what? Little girls poured into sports, and middle-sized girls and grown-up girls and all kinds of girls. So it's a flat-out lie, but the myth serves certain interests, so I guess it persists.
Absolutely.
Take a minute and give me some good news, so I don't just go and tear my hair out by the roots. Some time ago, you wrote a piece called "You've Come a Long Way, Ladies," about women in the Olympics. And update it for us. What can we look forward to? And can we look forward to good stuff?
I think we can look forward to a lot of good stuff. That piece was, the peg was, it was the first year that Qatar, Brunei, and Saudi Arabia sent a woman to the Olympics. It was the first year that we had every country having at least one woman representing them, and that's really an incredible thing. It was also the first year that women's boxing was a sport. So it was the first year that every event also had equal representation.
Right.
And that's just getting stronger. In the U.S. we had this amazing young boxer, Carissa Shields, who ended up winning the gold medal, and now she's training for Rio this year as well. It's going to be exciting to watch what she can do. These sports are just burgeoning right now, and you can see, as you said, once you open up these avenues for women, they're not just excited to play, and there's not just a huge demand. They're very good at it, and they spark interest among everybody else. What's really interesting about that to me is that if you look at democracy indexes, for example, you can see a huge correlation among political rights for women in a certain country and their access to sports. And that's really what's important about access to sports. You don't need to be a sports fan to care about rights for women, for example, but you can see the value that has. You can see among C-suite women who have made it in a very male-dominated finance or business industry, you can see a lot of them have sports backgrounds. That kind of taught them how to compete in this kind of closed-off environment. So it is beyond sports. It's not just about having, access to physical education and being healthy. It's also just about, pure political rights. And that's a really positive thing to see. Now, we are seeing some regression in certain countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, since the Olympics, because, kind of takes some international pressure to make that happen. But I think that we are moving in the right direction when it comes to that. Yeah,
that's such an interesting and important insight. And also, let's face it, it's good for sports. I mean, the women's soccer, more people were interested in women's soccer. I think I read somewhere that the ratings for women's soccer were higher than they had been for men's soccer ever.
So that's definitely true in the United States. Women's soccer is going to be what ushers in soccer to the United States, and that's really the first time I think you can say that about almost any sport. That's really it's been incredible to watch the galvanization of the country around that team last year.
Right.
was almost universal, and you don't really see that around soccer. You only really see that around the Super Bowl, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to put it on that level and to have that on the backs of these incredible women who, some of them aren't household names and they don't make a lot of money, and they're actually doing it for the love of the game. So if you're the kind of fan who is complaining that, a certain star NFL player makes too much money, go watch women's soccer, because these are people who are actually, the relative working class of the sports world and are still, kicking butt and winning at a level that we would want them to. I mean, that's really the beauty about sports. Sports can mean so much to so many people. It can mean your identity with your city, or your bond with your parents, or the history and everything like that. And can also just mean, I'm an American and I want to watch some American women do amazing things for a couple of months. And and that's really great.
Oh, well, so are you. You're just fantastic. And thank you for your insights, political, aesthetic and athletic and literary, all of the above. And thank you so much, Kavitha, for being with us on Women's Media Center Live today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And now for our new little feature department called We Told You So, or sometimes called We Won This. We don't take credit enough for our wins, and that's why only the failures feel real. So let's start with a We Told You So, which is that the prominent senior rabbi of a Bronx synagogue who drew scrutiny, to say the least, for having naked sauna chats with boys as young as age 12 is finally stepping down. I covered this issue on a show recently. When the board discovered this, the board of the synagogue, and asked him to step down, he fought back, and he apologized, and so they let him stay, but subsequently almost half the synagogue congregation walked out and formed a new congregation, and now, at last, he has stepped down. Bye-bye, Rabbi Jonathan Rosenblatt. We told you so. Here's another We Won This. The monarch butterfly migration is rebounding. This is also an item we covered a while ago because the monarchs are amazing. They fly more than 2,500 miles each year from Canada and the United States to a cluster of mountain forests in Mexico. And because what they eat, milkweed, was declining, they were declining. But after years of being ravaged by severe weather, that's climate change, and by shrinking habitats, the butterflies hibernating to the Mexican mountains rebounded last year, and that kindles real hope. Scientists and environmentalists said a variety of factors had contributed to the increase: new plantings of milkweed, milder weather, and efforts to protect the Mexican forests where the insects rest, which had been threatened from illegal logging. All of this has helped, and the U.S. is now trying to replace about 7.5 million acres of milkweed, either by planting or by stopping the use of pesticides that destroy it. That's an encouraging sign. We won this. Also, we won this. A Guatemala court has sentenced 2 former members of the military to 360 years in jail for the murder, rape, and sexual enslavement of indigenous women. The historic ruling is the first successful prosecution for sexual violence committed during Guatemala's military conflict in the 1980s. Francisco Reyes Giron and Herberto Valdez Asige were found guilty of crimes against humanity. Giron was the commander of a military base, and he was found guilty of holding 15 women in sexual and domestic slavery and for killing 1 woman and her 2 daughters. Asige, a paramilitary who carried out commissions for the army, was convicted for the same enslavement as well as for the forced disappearance of 7 men. Congratulations to human rights activists who have fought this for so long in Guatemala. We won this. One last break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will return directly with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back to some fighting words. Well, so the Republican Party has awakened to the nightmare reality that their Frankenstein's creature, whom they have been invoking with dog whistle appeals to their base for decades, is alive and walking and talking. Now the GOP is trying frantically to keep Donald Trump from being their standard-bearer. This is a man whose gutter politics scorns the growing use of Spanish as a second language in this country because he scorns the growing population of Latinos and Latinas, and yet he can't speak English himself. One of his favorite words is bigly. "I succeeded bigly," he says. "The polls trumpet me bigly. The crowds love me bigly." There's no such word. In a perfect marriage of his own style and cyberbullying, there's a new phenomenon. Campaigns of vicious tweets attacking those who speak out against him publicly. This is the same man who claimed he didn't know who David Duke was or what the KKK was before he had to try and walk back, having accepted a Duke endorsement. Actually, Duke said that sometimes he, even David Duke, thought Trump went, quote, "a little too far," close quote. But the phenomenon of Trump's astounding success with evangelicals, this twice-divorced candidate who boasts about his adulteries, flaunts never having asked any divine forgiveness, and says he would go to bed with his daughter in a heartbeat if she weren't related, gee, he keeps pulling in evangelical voters. He rarely addresses religious liberty. He's donated to Democrats in the past, and he once suggested that his sister, a federal judge who struck down the ban on late-term abortion in New Jersey, would make a great Supreme Court justice. Yet evangelicals love him. They abandoned Huckabee, and they're only lukewarm on Cruz, their own guys. But they love their Donald. It has the pundits scratching their heads. Well, the pundits say, evangelicals are not monolithic. Well, they don't fall in step with their leaders, many of whom endorsed Cruz. And, well, within evangelical ranks there are class and cultural differences. You bet. But it's simpler than any of that. Again and again, Trump's religious followers use the words strong and stern. They say, you're not voting for a pastor, but a president. They say, he's not orthodox, but he's a strong man. Jerry Falwell's son and heir says voters should choose a strong leader rather than a pious one. This longing for authoritarianism, in fact, underlies all the other divisions among Trump followers. It underlies divisions in class, age, ethnicity, and religion. There's a name for it. It's called patriarchy. Because it, in fact, created the concepts of class and ethnicity and religion. It's why the evangelicals are evangelical, with their belief in an omnipotent Father God, their longing for the all-knowing, strong, protective, vengeful, powerful leader, the patriarch in the sky and in the nation and in the family, the Mussolini who makes the trains run on time. And just a few days ago, Trump tweeted a quote from Mussolini, then claimed he hadn't known that was the source, but then he refused to take it back. Meanwhile, while Il Duce turns the grand old party into a reality show, hang on to some good news. In the wake of South Carolina and Super Tuesday, Hillary Rodham Clinton not only triumphed, as some of us predicted she would due to the electoral conscience and intelligence and awareness of history of black communities, especially black women. But she also edged ahead of Senator Sanders with white women, while his numbers stay steady with white men. In case you ever doubted it, the gender gap is back. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.